I'm Cait Sarazin. I'm a trauma-informed somatic coach. I'm trained in somatic experiencing, hakomi, sensorimotor. I combine somatic work with parts work and IFS work to ultimately help people get into their body, which is where trauma is stored, to figure out what they care for, what they long for, and to reconnect the mind and the body in hopes of being in deeper connection with themselves and others. And they're able to go into situations where they were triggering before and just behave differently in a way that's aligned with what they value and they care about. So I started on a traditional therapy route, and I think like a lot of people, I didn't think like anything was really that wrong, or I didn't, um, I didn't know that there was a different way to live. I just kind of assumed I was destined for living kind of flat, lonely, and like survival mode existence. And I was in talk therapy for quite a few years and didn't really find it very helpful and thought that it was kind of not beyond repair of sorts. And it wasn't until I hit a really, really low moment of feeling really, really isolated and alone and kind of getting to a place of like really not wanting to be alive and starting to really question like, do I want to keep going? Because I don't want to live like this in this existence. And when I mentioned this in another video where I started to meditate because it was the only thing I could think of. And when I did that, my body started to like twitch violently, like all this energy was coming out, and I started getting all these very intense physical symptoms of like stretching and breaking in my body, and all of these emotions coming forward that really started my path. And I think for me, all of that internal energy and constriction that I felt wouldn't allow me to ignore it. It was such a constant feeling, and I found myself just trying to find something to relieve the amount of internal sensations and also just like the deep void of feeling really, really alone and isolated. And like, no matter what I tried, no matter what I did externally, even when I was in the presence of others, it just wouldn't go away. And that led me to do a lot of like really extreme things, like being in a dark room for 2 months, like doing a lot of plant medicine, doing silent meditation retreats. And none of that really got me to the place that I wanted to. And I saw all these other people talking about these beautiful experiences they had. And I just found like I was the one in the ayahuasca retreat vomiting all night. I was not the one having this beautiful enlightened experience. And so I just thought that I was like really broken and beyond repair. And it really wasn't until I started doing somatic work that I realized how much of it wasn't that I was beyond repair. I just had zero sense of safety in myself and in my body. And I'd never had that. I never grew up around that. I was never given those resources like so many other people. And so when I started to build capacity and safety in my body, it started to change my external world because it gave me like an island to hold on to. And that started to open up the possibilities of living a different life. I think there were a lot more things that didn't help that helped. Um, what didn't help was these big experiences, whether it was like the darkroom meditation retreat or like doing this one time big thing where you're promised these big results. Because that's not really how deep healing works. Deep healing happens over time, slowly building capacity, slowly unraveling the ball of yarn that is trauma. And oftentimes I found like my biggest healing moments, I didn't even realize they happened because they happened so gradually over time. So I think that though some of those experiences can be really helpful when you're trying to move or make a big transition and you feel kind of stuck, but having a very, very clear intention and having enough um, tools already to process that. Like, if you can't sit with yourself in sober times, then how are you going to be able to do that during ayahuasca? How are you going to be able to integrate it afterwards? So I think that's the big piece that kind of transitioning that has helped is just sitting with myself and spending a lot of time sitting with myself, noticing and doing so in a way of not trying to control the experience, not trying to hold on to it, and just observing it and allowing everything to be there, allowing every uncomfortable emotion and image, and not trying to force something to happen, and just doing that. And sometimes that process included movement. A lot of times, so having very fluid practices. I do a lot of yin yoga, and quite a lot of times when I'm doing yoga, I'll start to notice my body wants to move. And instead of like, okay, I should move my body, just going really, really slowly and just noticing where my body wants to move. And quite often I'll get a lot of images or memories and it'll lead into a meditation. And so a lot of it was just like really, really slowing down, being in that observer point of view and noticing what needs to happen and not trying to control it or even make meaning of it, because it's a natural inclination to want to be like, what does this mean? What are these images? What do I do with them? And I've just found as a practitioner and as working with myself that like if you need to know, it's gonna know, you're going to know. And sometimes it's just extra information that it isn't important. Like a lot of times I'll sit down and meditate, and if I focus on a physical sensation, I'll get all of these memories coming up. And if I try to figure out what each one meant, I would get lost in the process. And I find that when something is needs more information, it needs my attention, it'll stop and it'll slow down. So I think trying to let go of control can be the hardest thing, and realizing how much how different that relationship is with healing and going into your body versus like a more cognitive method. It's letting go of control. It's realizing that there's a process, there's a way that this happens, and quite often it's nonlinear, and it isn't in the way that you maybe want it to be or expect it to be. Sometimes certain pieces need to happen first before you get to the big issue you want to work on. And sometimes it can feel like you're going backwards and redoing something that you've already done before. And quite often there's something that was missed there, or it connects to something else. So kind of learning how to navigate in that space. It's like learning a new language, learning a new way to be that requires a lot more letting go and trusting in the process and surrendering to it, the speed that it wants to go, the direction, and just being kind of along for the ride. And knowing when you do that, when you're tapping into that innate map your body has for healing, you're also tapping into the innate sense of what your essence really, really wants and cares about. And we often can like list off these things of oh yeah, like I want to make more money, I want to have better relationships, but that's often not at our core what we yearn and strive for. And so by entering this healing process and like letting go and surrendering, you're gonna tap into that, and that's when you can then actually create the things in your life, co-create the things in your life that you really want, and will actually make you feel alive, that are actually authentically you. Oh yes, I definitely felt broken or beyond repair. because literally everything that I would try that worked for other people, like, just did not work for me. And I think being someone that is fairly sensitive, that had all of these physical experiences, that was getting access to all these like random sources of information, like it was very easy for people to label me as crazy, as needy, as being too much, or in some cases not enough. And I think that's true for most people that fall outside the norm, whether it's neurodivergency or something else that you face that. And I wasn't someone that like embraced that well. I didn't like, it was really hard and it was painful to constantly have people I think it was really easy for people to judge me, and I took those to heart, that like maybe there is really something wrong with me. Why like can't I have these normal things that normal people have, like friendships and community? Like there must be something wrong with me. And I think it took just enough of doing this and looking back and realizing how much I went through on my own and how much strength I had, and my ability to still be with myself, and just developing that like kindness and compassion and acceptance over and over and over again, that it started to move, and I started to realize that, you know, quite often our greatest weaknesses are our greatest strengths, double-edged swords. So all of that rejection and isolation forced me to go to places I wouldn't have gone before and tend to parts of myself that wouldn't have been tended to, which gave me just so much greater access, that I have this rich internal world that I can journey into and use as a resource that doesn't go away, is immovable, and I wouldn't have developed that any other way. And while I don't think that, you know, when you're going through trauma or something difficult, saying that like, oh, it's going to be this beautiful experience is not helpful. And sometimes it just really sucks, and it's really terrible, and it sucks that like we have to be strong. It would be nice to be able to be soft. It sucks that I have to face rejection and all of these things that can feel incredibly painful. And I know I wouldn't be who I am today without those things. And right now, like, I am much more embracing the soft life, the non-violent healing, the slower way of living. And I wish that for everyone. And if you're someone that's in that violence and in that pain and suffering, the more you can just access that and allow yourself, give yourself that acceptance, and just that touch of like, you don't deserve to have to hold all this pain. You shouldn't have to be so strong, that your pain is valid, that it's real because you're feeling it. The more it eases up a little bit, and the more you create a little bit of space, and less resistance there is, because there's just there was so much of my experience where I thought my pain and my experiences weren't valid because I couldn't point to something that happened to me. I didn't have this big terrible experience, so I thought I was making it up or being too dramatic or being too sensitive. And over time I realized, well, I can feel it. I can feel it in my body. I can feel in my gut that like really terrible things happened, and that I was really overwhelmed, and that there's so much pain. And that's enough. The fact that I can feel it, the fact that my body is responding this way, the fact that my life went this way, shows that like whatever what it is, it doesn't matter. Like, it happened, it was painful, it was hard, and that's enough. And like, you know, fuck it if no one else understands that and no one else validates that. And it was quite a road to get there, because there was a lot of times where I was seeking, like, I wanted someone else to hold my pain. I wanted someone else to tell me that it was valid and that it was real, and that I didn't deserve that. And it just never happened in the way that I needed it. And it wasn't until I was able to deeply feel into it and be like, wow, like, I don't know what this was, but I can feel how hard it was. And I don't think anyone else could have ever given me that. Um, and I didn't get that until I really gave it to myself. And it was quite a violent process to get there. It wasn't like I had this beautiful, experience. It was like over and over seeking external validation, seeking like thinking connection was the issue, external connection, thinking I needed to do something to prove to myself or to my family. And it was just after trying and failing over and over and seeing like that didn't work and being forced to like do this part because it was the only option left, that after a lot of trying it finally moved. And I was like, oh, there's no way anyone else could have made me feel this way. There's no way anyone else could have held this pain because I needed to be held in such a specific way, and I was really the only person that could do that. Oh, I like constantly wish I could quit or, do something else or live like a more quote unquote normal life where this wasn't, so much of my time. I think that most people that end up on a healing journey, a deep one, and end up the people that we think of being most alive, most joyous, most kind, have been through something really hard in order to get there. It's not the only way, but I see it quite a bit. And for me, it wasn't because I had more strength or more tenacity or more resilience. It's because the other option was like killing myself and not being alive. And it was like that pressure all the time. And I think that pressure of like wanting to kill myself wasn't so much that like actually wanted to take my own life, but these parts of myself internally that really were very dead and didn't want to be there. And it took me quite a long time to like understand the difference around that, because there is so much fear in our society when you say that. And so but yeah, I constantly did not wanted to quit. And what made me keep going was I had this intuitive sense in my gut that this was just the way that I had to go. And because everything else I tried to do didn't work. Like, I couldn't build community, I couldn't build relationships, I couldn't live the life that I wanted despite doing so much and trying so much and like extending myself and sometimes forcing it, and just nothing worked. And I kept being pushed back into these situations where I was isolated. I was without these people that I wanted, this connection. And I think it started to occur to me that like, well, maybe this is actually where I need to be. Maybe this is the only thing that I need. And what I need to do is actually be alone and stop fighting that situation of being alone and being afraid of that, and thinking that because there weren't people around me, it said something about me. And when I embraced that a bit more over a lot of time, and it's not, even now I still struggle with it, I got where I needed to go. But it was incredibly difficult because there's not a lot of support in our society around doing that. A lot of times it looked like me not like doing a lot. It meant having a lot of time of just not having anything to show for my time, not being like quote unquote productive. It meant letting go of how I define success, how I defined being healthy or healing. Also, that you look about in nature, there's so much decay in nature, there is so much time where nothing is happening, and there's so much also stagnation or going backwards. And we often see that as a sign of decline or a sign of something's wrong. but it's so vital in this process. I don't know of many people that have gone through a deep healing process that haven't had to struggle with feelings of like not wanting to be alive, because there are parts of ourself that like are no longer serving us, and they don't necessarily need to like die, though I can feel that way. They need to let go of control. They need to stop being in the driver's seat. You have to have a different relationship with them, and sometimes that means a bit of a rebirth and a bit of a breaking of shells or constraints that you've been held by. But it's a constant, to be really authentically yourself in a society that encourages us to hate ourselves, to abandon ourselves, to be constantly stimulated, is a constant revolt and a constant needing to like be within yourself to check in of like, does this feel good for me? Because so many people on the externally are going to judge that process and say like, oh, like it means something if you can't get out of bed. And like sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it just means like you need to rest. And rest and like non-active time is such a huge vital part of healing that I think is often skipped over. We think we just like burst out one day, but there's so much time of being in this liminal space of nothing's happening and you're waiting and you're not sure if something's going to come in, and there's a lot of pressure to find something to cling on to hold on to, and resisting that and waiting can be like the hardest part. That I think the only way to go through that and is to do it enough and you get more comfortable with knowing that's a part of the process, and that if you really wait and listen to that part of yourself, you're going to get where you need to go. But it requires really not listening to the external voices and pressure around you, which takes a huge amount of self-trust and betting on yourself that like and that you can survive, and that you'll be okay and you'll get to ultimately where you're supposed to go to. Yeah, so in some ways my healing work now is not horribly different than it was when I started. There's just a little bit less of it, because there's less, it's more maintenance based, but big things still come up. Most of my practice just really involves sitting and meditation, and I do different types of meditation. Sometimes it's with the intention of like having a specific question that I'm looking to get answered to, like what is the next step, or what's making me feel alive. Sometimes it's accessing a specific part of myself. Like I know at this point, like when I feel certain types of anxiety, that it's like my 18-year-old part, so it's going in there and tending to that part and seeing what they may need. A lot of times it's just, I kind of sit down with my body and something will come up. I'll notice my body needs to move, or I'll be doing yoga. I do quite a bit of yin yoga specifically. I also spend a lot of time in nature. I find walking in nature is how I really feel connected, or laying on the ground, literally grounding, can feel really restorative. Also sometimes like I'll just lay in bed and get really comfortable, light incense, get really soft blankets, and I'll try to feel into the safety in my body, the areas that feel comfortable, and kind of imagine myself like wrapping a blanket and warm energy around the parts that feel painful. But it's more just like checking in versus like deep recovery or deep mining of myself. Though that does come up, and sometimes I'll still like be knocked off my feet and need a few days to just like work through what's coming up. The difference now is kind of having an understanding and a respect for the process of like knowing when it's there, like it needs to do its thing, and I'm just gonna try to get out of the way. There's less fear around it, and there's more now knowing that I will get through it, and coming from a somatic place, knowing that when there's a deep there's deep pain or deep sorrow or deep contraction, that expansion, joy is going to follow. And so that helps me stay in it and be with it more presently versus fighting it or being afraid I'm going to get stuck there and then I won't be able to get out and then I'll always feel this way. There's a knowing that like I will not be stuck this way because like we're never really like stuck. Like there's constant change everywhere. We're just sometimes in a place longer than we would like to be. And I've done plenty of that. I've been, stuck in really depressed states for like years at a time. And that's where nervous system regulation and getting back into that, being in touch with my own safety, helped move that and made this work doable. And I don't think I wouldn't have been able to do this work without that because I didn't have any safety really. And I was stuck in that contraction state and it felt like I couldn't access joy. It was just trauma and pain. I couldn't access the things that I didn't like to do anything. I was just kind of like, everything feels blah. Nothing's good. Everything feels just like hard. And I was just kind of obsessed with my own healing and like the trauma story, and it felt like nothing, it was just that way, and there was an obsession around it, and it really wasn't until I started doing nervous system work and got access to like little parts in my body that just felt neutral, just little things in my environment that felt like just a little bit good, and I just focused on those. And it's a lot easier to go into something hard and painful when you start with something that feels good. It's not a less valid way. And I think sometimes because the pain is so big, we want to just like go into it and sink into it and just be with it. And that's quite often way overwhelming. And like, we also don't need to do it that way. We just want to find like, what's the right amount to resolve it. And it's just a way easier way to heal. And it can be really hard to access initially because good things didn't feel safe. They're unfamiliar. They didn't exist. So of course we would be resistant to it. And I found that was some of the hardest parts of this work, was actually feeling good things, feeling pleasure, because there was definitely a lot of fear around pleasure being unsafe, unfamiliar, or being tied with pain. And that was a part of the work too. So yeah, it's just it's a bit of a process, and that was just how it went for me. Yeah, I would tell someone just starting out that this is a process. Sometimes it gets worse before it gets better. When you start accessing the parts of you that feel really alive, when you start really feeling into things, it can feel really overwhelming. Because if you've been numb and dissociated, then you haven't been feeling. So when you start to feel, while you feel all the good stuff, you also feel all the bad stuff and the hard stuff as well. And I think the importance of, really letting go of control, and surrendering to the process, and just starting to be really curious about, what's coming up, and not being so quick to judge it. That's still something that I wrestle with. It's really hard, and it's so vital. But I think the more that you can do that, the easier the process gets, because there's a clearer path, there's a clear sense of that it's going in a direction, when I think a lot of times there's so much confusion and feeling lost and not knowing what to do. When you surrender and allow the process to happen and get out of the way, it becomes clear that it's like, oh, this is going somewhere. I don't know where and I don't know how, but it's like it's moving in a direction and you're not stuck. And I think that felt so vital. So moving towards that. And I think just trying to also lean into the things that feel good, even if they're small, tracking the really small changes that happen. We're looking for 0.5, 1% changes, and starting to notice them, maybe writing them down of like, wow, I felt like I was just a little bit less triggered today. Or like today I was able to like make my bed. And like compiling those and kind of building yourself up, because it's so easy to not pay attention to these things and to be focused on how hard it is and how overwhelming it is. And it can be really hard to keep going if you're not noticing those small shifts. So yeah, taking the time to do that, and taking the time to rest also. How much rest is needed. That needing to rest doesn't mean that you're less valuable. And just spending time doing nothing. And that doesn't, so much of healing work doesn't look like productivity. It's not. There's a lot of time spent that doesn't have a clear, like, you put all this time in and you don't necessarily get an equal amount of like output out. It's not like capitalism in that sense. So I think letting go of like needing it to be that way, and knowing that like the more you show up, the more you just show up and you just try, even if it doesn't look perfect. It's not gonna look perfect. It's gonna look different every day. Your capacity to do work on yourself is gonna change. Sometimes that's like just acknowledging I can't get out of bed today, or like I can't answer the phone. Like that's your capacity. So I think it's every day realizing like how much of your battery is full, and then changing your expectations for yourself based on that. Like if you're only at 10% battery, you're probably not going to do like a 2-hour meditation session. So allowing yourself to fluctuate, allowing what the healing work looks like to fluctuate, and just accepting that for what it is, will just make this process so much easier.